Does it take time and usage for a flex pen to really show off its flex characteristics? So yes, I know that flex is a much talked about thing, especially it's a very appealing thing as there's a lot of hand lettering and stuff like that going on Instagram, and everybody wants to get into it. One of the biggest things I hear about is people that don't use a lot of flex pens. They try one or get one, especially in Noodlers, stainless steel, like a firmer flex. And they go like, this thing doesn't work right. And then we get questions about like, does it need to break in? Does it whatever, and or like something's wrong with my pen. It's not flexing as much. It's like, well, so I'll dissect this just a little bit. I am by no means like the flex expert. Okay, like I have knowledge of a bunch of different pens. I've used them, but I'm not a hand lettering person. I don't have like a great vast knowledge of vintage flex pens and stuff like that. So I'll give you kind of my basic understanding of it. And that should give you at least enough to kind of stumble me through this question. But the answer is kind of yes and no. Like it's really going to depend on the pen itself. I think specifically Noodlers ends up being an introduction for a lot of flex pens for people just because of the price. Like you know, you get in like the $14 to $23 range, and that's really accessible to a lot of people. It's exactly why Noodlers came out with those pens. And plus the stainless steel, it's a very hard metal. It's very durable and it's going to last a really long time under that abuse of the flex. So you're really kind of straining the metal when you're putting under flex, and stainless steel is going to be able to take that. So eventually over time it may break down a little bit, but really it's made to be pretty firm. And generally speaking with stainless steel, if you are flexing it to the point where it becomes softer, then you're probably having to overflex it a bit, and you might end up springing the tines before you would actually kind of like wear them in or break them in. So in my experience so far with using, you know, like the stainless steel flex nibs is, there's not really so much of a break-in period. Gold nibs are a little bit different because the metal's a little softer. The characteristics are slightly different. You know, it's hard for me to tell because I pretty much hear about like pens like the Falcon with a soft fine nib, or you know, pens like the Aurora 88s that are much more expensive and have kind of a custom tune thing, or like stuff that's done by nibmeisters specifically, kind of unique stuff, or it's like vintage flex stuff that's been around for decades, like probably from the 40s or 50s, and that was kind of like the flex heyday. It was like the mid early 1900s there. But the thing is, you don't really know 100% whether that is because that's just the way they were made back then, or if that's because it's been used for decades and really been broken in kind of perfectly, unless you have like, I don't know, like new old stock from like the 1930s of a Waterman or something like that. And there's probably vintage people out there that have much more of this kind of precision kind of expertise that maybe I don't. But it's my general understanding that yes, there is a degree of breaking in that can happen with a nib, but largely from what I've been told by people that kind of are in the nib making and tuning world is that they really just were made differently back then. They were tweaked differently. They were tuned differently back then. The equipment that was used back then was just different than what we have now. The characteristics of the gold and stuff like that, it's just not the same anymore. So that's part of why like you can't really maybe say get vintage flex like you used to. And then I think perhaps there's a small element of maybe nibs having been broken in over time. It's really hard for me to say because I don't have like good scientific proof of that being the case. But I think for kind of the purpose of the question that you're asking, if you're looking to buy, say, maybe a modern flex, which is all the stuff that I deal with, right? I think that maybe there's a small degree of, yes, you might break in the nib a little bit, but I think honestly, what's more likely going to be the case is the pen is going to break you in, meaning you're going to like learn how to adjust and use the flex properly, and that is going to have a bigger impact on how you use it than the nib itself kind of breaking in and being worn in. I think there's all kinds of mystique around, you know, like how much a pen kind of molds to an individual's writing and stuff like that. I think that's largely a romantic idea, and I just don't think that that holds up quite as much when you really get down into it. But I do believe 100% that you can adjust to using individual pens. I know I've done that personally. I certainly hold, you know, for example, I had a Lamy 2000 broad that was ground down to an Architect nib, and you got to hold it at a pretty high angle to get that Architect nib to write properly. So I hold that pen at a steeper angle. I don't like, you know, my hand is not rock solid and I'm like, oh, this pen writes terribly for me. I'm like, oh, okay, when I'm using this pen, I have to go up a little bit on my writing angle, and then it works great. And I know, like, I've used it enough times where I just program it in my brain to grab that pen, I'm like, boop, and I just go a little higher. You know, is it as comfortable for me for long writing sessions? No, because naturally I want to drop my hand down a little bit lower. So I don't use the pen for that purpose necessarily. But what I'm doing is I'm real time kind of adapting to whatever pen it is I'm using. And so I think that's more likely the case, is you're going to get used to using the Flex and practice with it more, and not so much the other way around. It's not going to really break into you. Got it? Sweet. Clear as mud, right?